Hello, hello! Welcome back to Loki's Librarian. If you are new here, welcome. I am your librarian, Katrina, and I do a book review a week, mixing up a cocktail, I called it. It's called Books and Booze. This month I was trying to take a look at what makes a good story arc, and I feel like I'm on the right track, but this week's book, which is The Hero's Journey, Joseph Campbell on His Life and Work by Joseph Campbell, was not actually quite what I was looking for. I mean, I probably should have started with The Hero with 1,000 Faces, but, you know, this is what I had, so this is where I went with. I mean, it is the book of the week. The accompanying cocktail is The Lonesome Hero. It is 1.5 ounces of rye whiskey, 3/4 ounce of Becherovka, which is a Czech herbal liqueur, and 1/2 ounce of cherry liqueur, and 2 dashes of orange bitters. So let's do this. It really didn't take me long to figure out that if I wanted to know more about the hero's journey, I should have started with his other work, The Hero of 1,000 Faces. I mean, this was more of a brief biography of Joseph Campbell, interspersed with outtakes from interviews done while making the video version of The Hero's Journey. And while The Hero's Journey has been distilled to an image that kind of looks like this book has been distilled even further to 8 chapters. We have a Call to Adventure, Road of Trials, Vision Quest, Meeting with the Goddess, The Boon, The Magic Flight, The Return Threshold, The Master of Two Worlds, and then an epilogue, The Tiger and the Goat. So, in brief, oh no, this goes in the mixer, and then it goes over the ice. Whew. I almost screwed that up right out the gate. So in brief, Joseph Campbell was born on March 26, 1904 in New York City to Charles and Josephine Campbell. And he became enthralled with mythology when he was taken to the Buffalo Bills Wild West show and the Museum of Natural History. And that's very young, right? He was a child when he went and saw those shows because they were the hot thing, especially the Buffalo Bill Wild West show back in the early 1900s. But what shifted his interest full on to the realm of myth was a biography by Leonardo da Vinci called The Romance of Leonardo da Vinci. This shifted his interest, reading going on, 3/4 ounce, eyeball Becherovka. This shifted him from an interest in science to cultural history, and at a pretty critical junction in his life, actually, the summer of 1922, which is right before he began college courses at Columbia University. And then while enrolled in Columbia, he was a student, an athlete, and a traveler, spending time in Europe in 1924 that resulted in meeting with theosophical teacher Jiddu Krishnamurti, which sparked an interest in Oriental studies. Now, Oriental in this case is not like the generic like Oriental rug. Joseph Campbell is very well aware that there were multiple cultures that were encompassed in the Orient. Orient just means basically anything east of Europe. And for those of you who don't know, there is a broad term for the West. That's when you hear like the Occidental Church. That means the Western Church of. Drop a little knowledge bomb on everybody out there who's sure to get their panties in a twist over how politically incorrect Joseph Campbell must surely be these days. Now, Joseph Campbell was lauded in his day as a visionary and as someone with his finger on the pulse of what makes humanity tick. I mean, he was not a psychiatrist. He was not a psychoanalyst. He did read Freud. He did read Jung. But his interest was in myth and how myth translates into people. How myth created the cultures that we all live in and need to work together in. That's what made him interesting, and that was his interest. I mean, almost 40 years posthumous, I mean, he died in 1987, he would probably be as denigrated as J.K. Rowling by those who once worshipped him. And we're going to come back to that in spades. 1/2 ounce of cherry liqueur. Boom. Doom, doom. So he did receive his Bachelor in Fine Arts in 1927, and from there he received a fellowship with an eye towards earning a doctorate, to travel to the University of Paris, where he was set to study Arthurian romances, which actually have a very strong basis in Celtic mythology, which I only partially knew. 2 dashes. I knew some of it because I was very, very into Arthurian legend when I was a kid, so I recognized some of the connections to Celtic mythology. I also did a stint with Celtic mythology. And so that's where he started out with his fellowship and really on his road towards becoming a myth master, if you will. And he spent a year in Paris before transferring to the University of Munich in 1928, where he studied medieval literature in the original German. And at this point, his interest went far east, like to India, and he became fascinated with Sanskrit, Hinduism, and Buddhism, as well as Freud, Jung, and Thomas Mann. Let me stir this up. Now, this was supposed to go over a single large ice cube. I forgot to freeze the large ice cubes. I mean, I have a large ice cube maker. I just forgot to make it. So I went over ice. Let's see how a Lonesome Hero tastes. This is supposed to be garnished with a lemon twist. Forgot the garnish because, well, how often do I actually do the garnish? Let's be fair here. I'm just here for the booze, not to make it look pretty. Now, he returned to the United States in 1929, and 2 weeks after his return, the stock market collapsed. He was not at this point sure he even wanted to continue down the PhD course because that kind of pigeonholes you into one single field, and he wanted a broad scope knowledge base. And he was not able to find work anyway. There was no money for the PhD studies, so he holed up in a cabin for 5 years and lived the dream. The man spent 5 years doing nothing but reading. Well, that's good. The cherry liqueur really cuts the, well, that's quite good. It really cuts the rye, so it's not, rye whiskey tends to be a little bit bitter because it's rye-based. So the cherry cuts that. The orange adds kind of a kick. And the herbal liqueur, wow, I've never had Becherovka, but that's pretty tasty. What the heck kind of herb is that? Karlovy Vary Carlsbad, from a secret mixture of herbs and spices, traditionally consumed neat, cooled, and below 6 degrees Celsius. Well, I should probably cool this a little bit more if I'm going to just drink the Becherovka, but good to know. Should really get like a liquor fridge or something like that. Anyways, so it's at this point in the story, I spent 5 years reading, where I realized that Joseph Campbell was my spirit animal and guiding light. And I have never hated / envied somebody more in my entire life as Joseph Campbell, able to spend 5 years divorced from humanity reading. Fuck Joseph Campbell. Okay, not really. I'm just very envious of him. I wish I could do that. Now, he did spend a year teaching in 1933 at Canterbury Prep School before returning to reading, and then he accepted a job in the spring of 34 to begin teaching next term at Sarah Lawrence College, which was an all-women's college, which he accepted and taught at for the next 38 years. And it's while teaching at Sarah Lawrence that he would meet dancer Jean Erdman. And she was a student of his. She was 12 years younger than him, which is not all that unusual. And I get that people in the 21st century are complete morons about the birds and the bees. So let me just say, this is not abnormal. The 2 to 3 year age gap that we currently view as normal is a very recent development, like within the last 100 years recent. Because before that, it was expected that you had to be able to support a wife and family before you got married. And so it was usually around the age of 28 that men would start looking for wives and marry 16 to 18-year-olds. Totally normal back in the day. Again, because people are complete morons, this is not an endorsement for pederasty. All right, age of consent is very much a thing, and I'm fine with it. I mean, 16 is, I live in Nevada, age of consent is 16, and looking back on it at, my 16-year-old self, I'm like, 18 might have been a better age of consent. Regardless, Jean was born in 1916, so she was 22 when she met Campbell. She was a full adult, all right? She was fully capable of making her own decisions, so this is not creepy by any metric. And I'm throwing this out there because people are absolute fucking morons, and they're going to scream that he was a groomer. He's not. They were in love. This was a love match. Campbell was inspired and awed by his wife, by her artistry and grace. And one of the things that made my heart go all smushy with romance is that in this little mini biography of Campbell, the introduction of Erdman is in the chapter called The Meeting with a Goddess. I mean, what's not to love about that, right? Your man should think you're a goddess. All right, I have spewed verbal diarrhea long enough. Let's keep going with this. In 1943, he began writing, and his first book was Where the Two Came to Their Father, a Navajo War Ceremonial. And in case anyone thinks that your electronics are not listening to your conversations, like shortly after reading this, Netflix threw up Dark Winds, which is based on Tony Hillerman's series featuring Joe Leaporn and Jim Chi, based in the American Southwest and heavily featuring Navajo lore. So, fuck you, Google. It's a great series, don't get me wrong. It's wonderfully cast, the writing is top-notch. I actually went out and got the first Joe Leaporn book, so that I could see how it compares to the show. It's wonderful. I have no complaints. But it probably was not something that would have popped up on my usual search history if they weren't listening. I love our government. Huge fan of the NSA. So Campbell spent a couple of years in the mid-1950s teaching Oriental philosophy to the State Department. Anybody know what was going on in the mid-1950s that he might have wanted, that the State Department might have wanted to learn about the Oriental philosophies? The things that were going on, like Korea, we were looking at getting into Vietnam, or more accurately, Eisenhower was trying to keep us out of Vietnam. But it's good to know what's going on over there. And in 1968, he began teaching at Esalen Institute in Big Sur, California, and he would teach there for 19 years, publishing The Hero with a Thousand Faces. I think it said in 1968. Is that what his original? I feel like it may have been published earlier than that. I feel like I heard somewhere 47. Maybe it was republished in 68. Anyways. This book famously inspired George Lucas with the creation of Star Wars. Like, there's a very long quote from Lucas praising Campbell for the inspiration, how, like, Lucas was struggling with the story arc and what he was trying to do. And after reading The Hero with 1,000 Faces and like one or two other books on myths that Campbell had written, he cut down this like 500-page massive script, like 100 pages, and just shot the movie. And of course, it has gone on to become an absolute juggernaut, right? And Campbell actually includes anecdotes of visiting the Lucas Ranch, where he binge watched the original trilogy with Lucas and was just absolutely delighted that his work had inspired that work. And he should be, right? I mean, that's hugely flattering. In his later years, Campbell became a traveling lecturer, and in addition to George Lucas, Campbell was invited backstage for a massive Grateful Dead concert, which Campbell compared to a modern-day Bacchanalia, and kind of the antithesis to the nuclear age. And this is really interesting because he lived his life looking through the lens of mythos, right? And he thinks that more people should do that. And I'm inclined to agree with him for a variety of reasons, some of which I'll come back to. Most of which I didn't think to write in the review, and so I will just have to think of them later and go, oh yeah, I should have put that in the review. Too late now. He didn't really listen to music or watch movies. He read. If he hadn't died about 10 years after I was born, I might think I was him reincarnated, because all I do is read books and watch Dark Winds, obviously, since I just mentioned that. But I don't watch movies. And the last movie that I saw in a theater was Deadpool and Wolverine, because my husband's like, hey, we're doing a double date. This is happening. I'm like, okay, let's do this. And I'll watch anything with Ryan Reynolds in it. But still, it's I get it. All right. There is much more to the written word. It's a fine medium because it's absolutely perfect. There was no pandering. I can't say that now. I started reading next week's book, and there's a lot of pandering. I'm like 40 pages in, and there's so much pandering. All right, I went on a tangent again. So he retired from the various speaking and teaching positions, and he was talked into contributing to a video series on mythology based on his hero's journey archetype. And that, of course, went over very well, became a smash hit. It resonated with people because ultimately we all recognize that. We all recognize that storytelling is the medium through which life has passed down to us. He was writing for publication up till the day he died, which was October 30th, 1987. So that's the biographical portion of the book. And each chapter started with a bit of this biography. And I literally, when I was writing this up to come up with that, I went through each, like the first page of each chapter is this biography, and so I've condensed it even further to give you this, right? What are some of the wisdoms that came out of these interviews? What are some of the things that popped out at me and maybe go, okay, I see what they're doing here. Well, Campbell was born and raised Catholic, specifically Irish Catholic, right? The clan Campbell came over from Ireland, probably during the potato famine, and he grew up in New York as part of that clan. And while I don't necessarily think he hated Christianity per se, I get the sense that he was genuinely baffled by how divorced Christians in general are from nature. One of the repeating comments that comes up is how Christianity harps on the fall, meaning the fall from grace, the removal from the Garden of Eden, and how this is a metaphorical separation from nature, and that getting back to nature in any format is important for overall mental health and spiritual well-being. And he talks about that quite a bit, how most people who read myths and religion in general, they see this as a metaphor, right? And they recognize that it's a metaphorical thing, and you can apply a metaphor to your own life to make your life better, versus certain peoples of the book, I'm going to say Christians and Islam specifically, and Judaism, tend to see it as historical fact. And because it's historical fact, they take the metaphor out of it, and that is what leads to this divorce from nature. Now, again, we are stupid in the 21st century, all right? If you need help, please get it. And I know there's a lot of, memes floating around saying, oh, you don't really need Prozac, all you need to do is touch nature, and that's not necessarily true, all right? There are definite things that cause chemical imbalances in the brain that you should see a doctor for and get treatment for if you need it. But for the vast majorities of people, touching grass is going to fix your woes, all right? And he believed that the first year of university should be spent studying the myths and getting in touch with what archetype speaks to you, and then you build on that archetype. And apparently this is what Carl Jung did exactly that, like literally. Carl Jung determined that the builder was his archetype, and he spent several years building by hand a castle in Austria, which Campbell was invited to visit. Like literally, stone by stone, the man built the castle, which I'm fascinated by and kind of want to go see. I don't know if it's open to the public. I might have to Google that and make a trip to Austria if it is. But here's where Campbell would be canceled by the Twitterati. Because what if the archetype that speaks to you comes from another culture? Well, I mean, in the 21st century, that's completely fine if you are not a white, cis, hetero man or woman, right? If you are a white, cis, hetero man or woman, you might get a slight slide if you switch your genders. I feel like you probably wouldn't really necessarily approve of all the gender swapping going on, because as somebody who actively studied myths for literally his entire life, he would know which cultures actually had that, and he's going to know that's a finite thing. It's not as widespread as people want you to think it is. If you're a Christian, if you're white, cis, hetero man or woman, and you're not trans, you're a Christian and a racist. That's your archetype. Sorry. Deal with it. You can say you're pagan. I mean, hell, I'm, Lokian, right? But those are your only two acceptable options. You're a Christian and a racist. I've been called racist in the last week, so that was super fun times for me. Incidentally, I was called racist because I pointed out that communism killed 100 million people in the last 100 years. That made me a Nazi. Oh well. You can't win for losing. If you're white, apologize for the crime of having been born white and acknowledge you are privileged to have been born white. Accept that you're Christian and racist and let everybody else have the archetypal fun. The white man's day has passed. And I don't think Campbell would approve of that at all. He wanted knowledge. He wanted knowledge for knowledge's sake. He wanted to know what was out there. And he saw, I think, myths as a way of bringing humanity back to itself. All right. He spends huge tracts of this book, well, not huge tracts, but there are several passages that really stick out in my head where he decries the politics and how politics are divisive and tribal making, and that tribalism isn't good. It's not good for humanity. It very much puts us in an us versus them category, much like Christianity does. He talks about science and how science is like the ultimate truth because, you experiment with one thing. If that doesn't work, you try something else. And I don't think he would be impressed at all with what has happened in the last 15 years with science. It's less science and more cult. And I think that as somebody who spent a lifetime studying myth, he would recognize that. I could be wrong, but I think he would have recognized that. If he had been born in 2004, we would never have even known his name, because he had gone to college in a time with such intellectual curiosity about India, Japan, China, Middle Eastern, the North Africa, Turkey, and Native American cultures was frowned on and seen as cultural appropriation. He'd have been smothered in his curiosity. And if he'd pushed the importance of the female and male archetypes as he does in this book, oh my God, he would be in good company with J.K. Rowling and other warriors of female rights, aka TERFs. Keep fighting, ladies. Your goddess is all. Instead, as Campbell points out in interviews that occurred between 1982 and I think 85, schools are not teaching kids how to think, they're teaching them what to think. And I'm paraphrasing there. Indoctrination is rampant, which he emphatically did not approve of. And he actually calls it indoctrination. He said several times in the interviews contained herein, what inspired his own research and learning on heroic archetypes was teaching the young women at Sarah Lawrence College. And they wanted to understand what the hero was and how they might contribute to that archetype as the mothers of heroes. Unlike today's modern feminists who tortures their young sons into being women, the women who were taught by Campbell knew they needed to raise men and asked how to do it. A lot of hate at the boomer generation, and it was the boomers who were asking these questions of him. And the boomers raised Gen X and raised us to go out and be independent and stand on our own feet. And Gen X hates the boomers for doing this to them. And a huge swath of Gen X raised an absolute shit generation and then bitches about kids these days. I'm getting maudlin. Oh my God, this is a very good alcohol, but I'm getting a little maudlin with the thoughts rolling around in my head right now. Wow. Who knew? Whiskey makes me introspective and pensive and maudlin. All these fine words that very rarely see the light of day. Now, before I wrap this up, one thing I want to comment on is follow your bliss. This idea apparently originated with Campbell. I mean, who knew? Not me. I didn't know that. And I mean, he certainly followed his bliss, right? His bliss was learning about these myths and doing that. And here's where people have gotten it drastically, horribly, detrimentally wrong. follow your bliss does not mean just do what makes you happy. And Campbell literally says that, exactly that. All right, I am not paraphrasing here. I'm not guessing at what he says. Specifically says, direct quote, "If your bliss is just your fun and your excitement, you're on the wrong track," end quote. The passages preceding this include discussions of Native American manhood ceremonies, which in some cases can be tantamount to torture, which approaches bliss, right? You can cut that fine edge of pain, where pain becomes pleasure, and boom, torture approaches bliss. You can look at the 50 Shades of Grey if you want to see that, which I hate recommending that series. That was such an awful series. There was no myth making in there. It was just badly written pornography. I can say that because I am broke as fuck, and E.L. James laughs her way to the bank every single day while I sit here in my poor house drinking my whiskey. Maybe I should write badly written porn. Maybe I too could be laughing my way to the bank and then spend 5 years doing nothing but reading. Anyways, Campbell clarifies, quote, "When you follow your bliss," and by bliss I mean the deep sense of being in it, and that is emphasized in the book, so I put the emphasis in my quote here. When you follow your bliss, and by bliss I mean the deep sense of being in it and doing what the push is out of your own existence, right? Get out of your comfort zone. It may not be fun, probably won't be fun, but it's your bliss, and there's bliss behind pain too. So it's not necessarily do what brings you joy. It's not do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life, but do what brings your life meaning. And sometimes that's the hard thing. But if you find joy in doing the hard thing, you're on the hero's path. And that's it for this week. If you liked what you saw, don't forget to subscribe, and I will see you guys next Sunday. Hold on. I had somebody who challenged me to finish each cocktail before I finish the review. I have to leave a tiny little bit so the husband can try it. Let's do this. Okay, the husband can have the rest. See you guys next Sunday. Bye.